Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time of day it is, I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is When the Bow Breaks. Yeah, all right, have fun, guys. And so now checking in on the entertainments of the bygone era that those in 1870-ish were looking back so fondly on. You know, we had the tableau parties and the theatricals, the charity balls, and so forth. And we had the Martha Washington tea parties and the Mishkianza, not to mention all the centennial commemoration that was going on in 1876, of course, celebrating 100 years of independence, right? Yeah, and so next up on the list, we have the Mistletoe Bow. And I'm like, come on, Amy. How many things are you going to throw at me that I never heard of before? And the fact that it's in quotes is really interesting and what it means or could mean, because just seeing it kind of is like an oxymoron to me or something because it didn't make sense, right? Because a bough, of course, is a main artery branch of a tree that other lots of branches come off of, right? But I always thought mistletoe was like an ivy or a bush or something like that. I didn't ever think of it as a tree. And so the Wikipedia, is kind enough to let me know that mistletoe is in fact a parasite that grows on larger plants, usually hardwood trees. Its roots drawing nutrients from the sap of the host plant. And so I guess this is what a mistletoe bough looks like. It's a bough riddled with mistletoe. Right, and here's just like a sprig of mistletoe that, would be hung up at Christmas for the kissin'. And I guess this is called a bough as well. And so not only is the Wikipedia kind enough to let us know that mistletoe is a parasite, occultworld.com lets us know that mistletoe possesses magical powers of fertility, healing, luck, and protection against evil. So really kind of amazing, again, tying everything into Baltimore being this secret, sacred place of fertility goddess worship. I mean, that really is an undercurrent theme here. Right? And so what the legend of the Mistletoe Bow was, as I found out, right, it's a horror story which has been associated with many mansions and stately homes in England. And so the plot is like a new bride playing a game of hide and seek or trying to get away from the crowd during her wedding breakfast, hides in a chest in an attic and is unable to escape. She is not discovered by her family and friends, and suffocates or dies of thirst. The body is found many years later in the locked chest as a skeleton in a wedding dress. All right, kind of interesting story, right? But again, nothing like what is the party aspect of this? That it was her wedding? What could they possibly have been looking back for? And so the history of this story, right, is that the tale first appeared in print form in a poem by Samuel Rogers entitled Ginevra. In his book, Italy, published in 1822, that key year, right, in notes on this work, Rogers states that the story is, I believe, founded on fact. Though the time and the place are uncertain, many old houses lay claim to it. I'm sure they did, especially after the story takes off. The popularity of the tale was greatly increased when it appeared as a song in the 1830s entitled The Mistletoe Bow, written by these guys, and Bishop, interesting. Right, the song proved very popular. In 1859, its solemn chanting was referred to as a national occurrence at Christmas. So it became a Christmas anthem within about 35 years of the story being written. By 1862, the song was referred to as one of the most popular songs ever written. Right? So again, does that mean there was a dearth of songs there, or was the song that good? And believe me, I'm going to link it, right? And so now we're getting somewhere, right? It's a Christmas anthem, so people would celebrate it around Christmas. But again, why would the elders of 1870 be looking back to this as some form of some bygone era found only in dreams, And so it says that, further works inspired by the song include a play of the same name by Charles A. Somerset. And I think it's interesting that Sally White, Mrs. Dr. Charles Carroll, was from Somerset County, Maryland, right? So that's kind of interesting, right? And the play was first produced in 1835. And then there were two short stories. Henry James, very popular writer, thank you, wrote Romance of Certain Old Clothes, published in 1868, so now right in that time period. Right? And then there was Susan Wallace's Ginevra of the Old Oak Chest, A Christmas Story, published in 1887. The song is also played in Thomas Hardy's Laudicane. I can't even try. Right? But after the scene involving the capture of George Somerset's handkerchief from the Tower, another Somerset in here. So again, so interesting now, this Somerset Carol thing coming in here apophonetically. Right? My apophenia is running wild with this story. Right? There were film versions of the Mistletoe Bow in 1904, right, by the Clarendon Film Company. A 1923 version made by the British and Colonial Kinematograph, right? And then there was a 1926 production by Cosmopolitan Films directed by none other than C.C. Calvert, right? Look at those triple C's right there. Now, I have not looked him up for this because it would just bring me too far, right? And so this 1904 version is on YouTube, and I will link it. I mean, it's a fun watch, right? And there's new music by this band, Saint Etienne. I don't know why they couldn't play the original, piano pieces that were written for it in 1904, but interesting that there was a modern band doing that. And so now with the fact that there was a play back in, when was the play? In 1835, now I'm thinking, okay, there must have been a celebrated run of this play in Baltimore back in the day. The best actors were participating. It was a hot ticket among the elite, right? Because they were the only ones who could afford to go to these things, right? And so I decided to search it in the Baltimore Sun archive, and I got 156 hits, right? But the weird thing is I couldn't find any mention of it any earlier than the late 1880s, 1880s. See, thank you. And so now the interesting thing here is that there really were not a lot of results for the 1800s at all, only a small handful, right? And none of them earlier than the late 1800s. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the date of the last one, but nothing in the 1870s or earlier. Never any mention of the play being in town with all the theaters and everything that we have here, and entertainments being, that's the splash page of the Baltimore Sun in the early days is what's going on at the theaters. And so that's really kind of interesting that they would paint this as a very popular play, but I could find no early references to it. The earliest reference to the play being put on that I could find was in 1902. The Mistletoe Bow, brilliant entertainment in the city of Annapolis. And so now a thing about the Mistletoe Bow story, and this is something that, again, I only learned by watching the film because the Wikipedia article about it was so vague, is it's called the Mistletoe Bow because the wedding party begins with everybody kind of sitting or standing under a mistletoe bough hanging from the ceiling, at this breakfast party or whatever it was. And so that's why it's called the Mistletoe Bow, because that's where the stage is set. It's set under this hanging mistletoe bough. Right? And so because of the mistletoe associations, it becomes very much associated with Christmas, and that's where most of the references to mistletoe in the Baltimore Sun come in, is through the history of Christmas and how mistletoe got into the Christmas myth and things like that. Thank you again. But one thing about this performance that I thought was really interesting, that as part of the series of performances that went on at this opera house that day, or perhaps after this performance, there was something called the Roger D. Coverley dance, which was magnificent, right? Of course it was, as were the minuet dances and a Maypole dance, right? So they did a Maypole dance, which is a fertility dance done on May Day, on May 1st, which is spring. So I thought that was kind of interesting that this Christmas story would have a Maypole dance, right? And so that's the Mistletoe Bow. Nothing I could really find, nothing about it being a party or anything happening in Baltimore. So I think it's really strange, how she mentions this. Why? And so from the Mistletoe Bow, right, they go into the Wednesday Club, right? The Wednesday Club, right, which proved itself for many years such a weighty factor in entertaining. And so what the Wednesday Club was, of course, it was a offspring of the Maryland Club. And what the Wednesday Club and the Maryland Club, what they did was they put on plays for themselves, right? And they screened these things before putting them in the theaters in the city. And my guess, and the way it's playing to me, sending them abroad, out into other cities and other marketplaces. These plays and tableau parties and waxworks, they were part of the program used to, assimilate these new populations, the immigrants or whoever they were, right? Whoever we are today, right? Because it all kind of starts with this, right? This is when they started to get us. Right? And the Wednesday Club eventually gets its own theater, its own lyceum, right, to put these things on, which we'll talk about in a second. And so in her infinite kindness, Amy Darcy Wetmore leaves us a nice list of the members of the Wednesday Club. And she leads off with the late Mr. John McKim, whose name I said we would be getting more familiar with, and who was one of the performers, one of the knights in the Mishkianza. Right? He was also one of the very best actors of the many good ones in the Wednesday Club. All right. And so again, these were private performances that they put on for themselves first. All right. And, John McKim was an actor. Yeah, he was. All right. And some of the other people involved, just name dropping real quick here. There's a Redwood that catches my eye. We have Riddle Brown again. James Key rearing his ugly head again. And here we have Harper Pennington. And she says prominent men. And so she must mean RG here when he wasn't busy traveling abroad and painting for the Prince of Wales and hanging with Whistler and his mother, right? He was hanging with the Wednesday Club, putting on plays and stuff. And so, Mary, look who we have here. We have a Frank Donaldson in with your McKims. And I know that's a big part of what you look at. So really quite incredible. And so now that we have some of the major players, we have the Wednesday Club and the Peabody Institute and the Maryland Club. And, we know some of these names, the weave is starting to get a little tighter here now as we're going forward. But I just wanted to close out the Wednesday Club with this, because I did find this when I was trying to find anything. There really wasn't much out there. I found a webpage for one George A. Frederick, prominent architect of historic Baltimore landmarks, and so I didn't go into what his landmarks were. I'm sure they were quite prominent, right? But I found that in connection to the Wednesday Club, as I was saying, because in this article on him, they mentioned that this is where the Wednesday Club held their plays, or at least late in the game in the 1890s. Because again, the Wednesday Club would have formed much, much earlier than this, right? And this was the Lyceum Theater in Baltimore City, right? Beautiful theater and stage. Right? But this article goes on to say, because again, it was about the Wednesday Club. We're not sure of Frederick's involvement in the Wednesday Club, but John McGrain of the Baltimore Architectural Foundation reports that the Wednesday Club began around 1858. Members built their clubhouse with a Gothic front, with its own theater on Charles Street, north of Biddle. Again, private theater just for them. And it survived the Civil War. Right? The club was sold to John W. Albaugh in 1887, who enlarged it, altered the front, and developed it into Albaugh's Theater, which became this Lyceum. So I guess on Charles Street. And this article, which again, I know I'm not the best at it, but I'll try to link it. This article gives the closing shot of, and this is how I know they were so connected. Some say the Wednesday Club was a weekly lunch held at the Maryland Club. No. Really? I wouldn't have guessed. And so, all right, so I'm going to wrap this one up here, but I'm going to close this one out with a little cherry, which is something I haven't done in a while. And that's when I was looking for information on the Wednesday Club, I came across a letter from them that was for sale on eBay. It was a little more than I was willing to spend, but I guess because I went and looked at it, they changed it up and they added a make an offer option. And so that's what I did. I made an offer. All right. It sent 1881 Baltimore, Maryland Lyceum. So this is really exciting. I hope I win. Wish me luck. All right. And so remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until the next one, cheers.